Hi everyone, welcome to Communication and Conflict, promoting mindful communication, growth through conflict. And this is also available as a podcast under the name Chaos, CAOS, on anchor.fm and available as an Apple podcast as well. So today I want to talk about how we can have useful and productive communication with someone we dislike or despise or even hate. Or perhaps in turn someone who feels that way about us, even if we don't feel so strongly about them. But the point being about how we can have communication which doesn't get drawn into simply going around in circles in a way which leads to resentment and frustration and despair. Um, and and what I'm going to talk about is pretty much relevant to any mode of communication. So it could be a face-to-face discussion, it could be a conversation over the phone, it could be an email exchange, it could be a social media interaction. And to be honest, some of the kind of inspirations I've had for doing this video have been as much taken from social media interactions that I've been kind of watching or observing, sometimes been involved in, because obviously various people get involved in such interactions. But it's true of any interaction where a conversation is being had or communication is occurring about something which is either happened or has been said, or it's an opinion about a particular situation. So obviously social media interactions can be between people who've never met, and it might be about something the other side of the world. In other situations, it may be a face-to-face discussion we're having with someone about something that happened in our workplace, or happened in the family, or happened in the community, etc. So this, what I'm going to talk about, is true in any of those interactions. But I want to talk about the things that influence whether the communication is useful and productive from our perspective. And the point being, as I've said in many videos, is we can't control what's going on for other people, but we can look to optimize what's happening for us. So what I'm going to talk about today is how we can optimize our involvement in communication. And actually, in turn, anyway, it usually means that it's more effective and optimal for the other people involved. But we're not trying to control that, because we can't control that. But we can control and take ownership of our own contributions to any such situations. And this is very much one of the things that can easily be overlooked when people have a very difficult, entrenched, perhaps resentful, challenging, frustrating, depressing, enraging kind of interaction with someone. So we're talking here, or I'm talking here, about things like people may feel bullied at work, and they have various kind of thoughts and feelings about the person they see as bullying them. It could be someone within a family who feels very resentful and angry towards another person in the family. It could be between parents and teenagers, or it could be between siblings, or it could be between partners in a family. It could be in the community between neighbours, and also, as I said, in workplaces as well. Even if it's not something about bullying, it could be just about how somebody else is acting, or things they've done, or things they've said. So I'm talking about any kind of communication here, because there are features of what means it won't be useful and productive, and obviously the counter side to that is there are features of what will help it to be productive. And so I'm going to go through kind of three main kind of headings of things, but within them there are kind of subheadings about things which also contribute to enhancing the possibility for a conversation or communication to be useful and productive. So the first thing that I would say is, if you're having a strong difficulty with somebody else, a kind of significant difficulty with somebody else, and you're going to interact with them, the first thing you need to consider is, do you want it to be useful and productive? And that might seem a silly question, because we might say, yeah, well, of course I do. And then we might say, but they won't. And so we immediately abdicate responsibility by saying it's all about them. So we're immediately disempowering ourselves by saying that kind of thing, because we're saying it's all about them. And the only way things will move forward is if they change. They've got to change. They've got to be different. So we can immediately reject that idea by saying, well, I do, but they don't. So it really is a serious question. Do you want your interaction to be useful and productive? What are you going to do that means it enhances that possibility? If you do think that your interaction has got to be about saying, um, you know, they're unreasonable, they're stupid, they're a bully, they're an idiot, they're a left-wing social justice warrior, snowflake, or they're a right-wing fascist dictator, with superior attitudes. And if you're wanting it to be a forum in which you're going to do that, then this video is not for you. It's got to be about whether you're actually looking to have a useful and productive communication with the person. So you do really need to consider that before you go ahead, because then it's about looking at, well, how can I optimize that for myself? And so what I would say is to look at any of the labels that you have about the other person or persons that you're interacting with. Again, this could be your son or daughter, it could be your work colleague, it could be your neighbor, it could be somebody on Twitter or Facebook that you're interacting with, and it's a difficult relationship or something difficult has happened in the past. And do seriously think about, what labels do you have for them? Do you think they're stupid? Do you think they're unreasonable? Do you think they're an idiot? Do you think they're an asshole? Do you think they're a lefty social justice warrior, or a right-wing fascist, or whatever your labels are? Because the more you're conscious of what those labels are, the more you're going to be able to not use them in your communication. Because that is one of the ways in which most communications fail and break down. The second we start making personal comments about the other person, because there are various other ways in which we can address that concern without making it a personal comment. Now again, some people may say at this point, they may say, oh well, if that's the case, you're just wanting to be touchy-feely, softy-wafty, woo-hoo, etc. No, what I'm talking about is, do you want an effective conversation? So this isn't about saying you should be able to say these things about people. It's about saying that if you do, you're not going to get anywhere with your conversation, or even if you get somewhere, you're not going to get half as far as you could do in terms of what you want from that interaction, if you're thinking that it's a space in which you can make it to kind of express those labels about the individual. Because at the end of the day, you've fallen out with that individual over something that's happened. So it's an opinion they've expressed, it's an action they've taken, it's something they've said, that's what you've fallen out over. So that, if you're going to have something useful and productive from your communication, is what you need to focus on. Even a tame label like saying, I think you're being unreasonable, means that will become a distraction from what it is you're trying to achieve. And the point being that if I say to you, okay, so maybe you're my neighbour and you're playing music loud and I'm disturbed by it. So I go around to you and I say, okay, your music's quite loud and I can't hear my television while it's going on. So would it be possible for you to turn it down? If I then add, because I think you're being very unreasonable and inconsiderate by doing it, then immediately, instead of the main message I wanted to convey, I'm distracting on making it a personal comment about the individual, a critical comment. Now they're quite tame comments. I think you're being unreasonable or stubborn or inconsiderate. They're quite tame. We all know we could say much more severe labels. But even those will be a distraction from actually what I'm going round about, which is the noise, the fact that I'm feeling disturbed by the noise. So therefore, just in my own interests, it's better that I don't use those labels, even if I'm thinking them, even if they're the ones that are in my head. What I'm wanting is a useful and productive outcome from my discussion. So the second I start using those personal labels like that, it distracts from the focus of what's important for me, and it means that the person is more likely to respond in a way which is defending against that personal label than actually considering what it is I've said. And the thing is, by not talking about the personal labels, it kind of means it's hard for them to come back with a reaction against us. They may be feeling a bit awkward or guilty or uneasy about the fact that their music has disturbed us, but the second we use a personal label about them, it means they can almost like set that aside and not have to consider that, because now we've been critical of them as a person. So therefore, they can react to that instead and then almost justify their action and not responding to what we're asking about because we've been rude to them. And if I give you an example, this is the reason I've used the neighbour dispute situation is because this is very common in neighbour disputes. But as you know, I've worked in a whole range of different contexts of disputes. But when I used to work in neighbour mediation, one of the things that meant that disputes got stuck was if there was an issue over a tree overhanging a fence, or music noise, or rubbish being put in the wrong place or spilling out, etc., because it wasn't put in the right place, whatever the issue is about. The reason it always escalated was because instead of simply talking about the problem, people would have started using personal comments about each other. You know, you don't care about the environment. You're lazy, you're inconsiderate, you're unreasonable, you're just a social housing tenant. Oh, you're a snobby private tenant. And it would have all got into that, which has nothing to do with the actual issue of concern. And that's true in workplace disputes, it's true in family disputes as well, that what distracts from actually having a useful and productive discussion is the personal labels that come in. So as I say, if you're about to have, or you're wanting to have communication with someone about a difficulty that's happened, or a difficult conversation you're about to have, or any kind of interaction, the thing I would say is to stop and think, what are the labels, the critical labels, the possibly even abusive labels that you have for the other person, and how are you going to keep them out of anything that you say in your interaction with them, in your communication with them. Because the second that happens, that's when it stops being an effective and useful conversation. It doesn't have to be a complete disaster if one slips in, but you've got to be mindful of your communication when you do it. Otherwise it will just become what I call a spear throwing exercise, where I throw a spear at you saying you're ignorant, and you throw a spear at me saying I'm rude and abusive, and I'm a bully, and then I throw a spear at you saying you're just trying to be lazy, and it's a complete waste of time and energy. And the point is, it won't resolve it. It will have to come back later because we're both carrying that resentment as a consequence. And we'll say it's about the other one, but because we've used personal labels, it's as much about us. So as I say, that to me is one of the most important things to consider. If you're having a conversation about a difficult thing, to what extent are you including within it personal comments about the other person? And you may think, oh, well, it doesn't matter. It does matter, because that's what people will react to. They'll stop listening to what your concern is about the things that have happened or the things that have been said, and they'll focus on the things, the label that you've given them. Such as in a workplace, you're a bully. Now, some people may think it's entirely justified to say that, but to consider what that means for the person being called that, it will often mean they just completely shut down the conversation and say, right, you're going to have to make that formal, etc. And therefore any useful and productive conversation about what led to the difficulty is going to end, because people will immediately react to that kind of label. So, for example, as a mediator, if someone uses any kind of label about people, so often before mediation, if it is a joint meeting going to go ahead, before that I will have often met with people individually. And if they use labels like that, which could include abusive labels, my question will always be, so what's happened that leads you to say that? Because it's about a principle that we use in mediation, which says that it's about exploring the behavior, not the person. So it's about exploring, so what is it the person's done that leads you to describe them with that label, whether it's arsehole, unreasonable, bully, dictator, or beep, abusive term. Whatever the phrase is, I will always ask, so what's happened? What did they do? What happened in the situation that leads you to say that? Because then the focus is back to what's happened, which is the thing that people have fallen out over. So those are the things that mean a communication ceases to be useful and productive, because even if there's been reference to the things that have happened, people will focus more on the fact they've been called a name and defend against that, rather than respond to the actual issue of concern. And you'll notice that an effective conversation will always be about what the issue is. In any context, it won't be about the labels that people have about each other and trying to prove and disprove those labels. Now you might say, well, what if the person calls you a label? Well, in a way, it's an opportunity. So say someone does say to me, I think you're being really unreasonable about that. Then I can say, okay, so what is it you think is unreasonable? And they can then expand on, and I can then understand more about where they're coming from. I don't have to say, well, I think you're being stubborn, or I think you're being difficult in return, because that won't get me anywhere. I won't learn anything from that. Now, obviously, there might be some labels people use towards us that we don't want to take time to explore. We may just think, okay, I'm not going to, I don't want to kind of go anywhere with that. But the point is, do we think we've got to say a label back in return? Because if that's the case, we're then contributing our own dysfunction to the conversation. They can call us all sorts of names if they want to, and some we may want to explore and say, so what is it that leads you to say that? And we would do that because it's in our interest to understand where they're coming from. And again, I just want to take a little time about that, is that sometimes people think, but if I do that, that's like I'm accepting them calling me that name. You're not accepting it. You're just trying to understand it. And the whole point is, by understanding someone's point of view, it doesn't mean to say you've got to agree with it. And that's what we call in our model of conflict about what we call connection. The capacity to understand someone's point of view without feeling any expectation that we've got to agree with it, but by understanding it rather than dismissing it, it gives us information that's useful for us, because then we can understand why the things that are happening, whereas before it's probably a bit, we're a bit kind of puzzled as to why things are happening. We just don't understand it. But by having that understanding, it gives us more information, and we can support ourselves with going forward. So all of these things become opportunities. But as I say, there might be phrases used towards us that we just don't want to accept, in which case it's our decision. If someone does start being abusive towards us, we're not learning anything from it anyway. But we can, even if someone uses labels about us, as long as we don't respond in kind by using another label in return, in which case that's what we're going to focus on, we can still learn something from it. So that's the second thing, is so first of all, we don't use labels about people. We focus on what the issue is and what we want to learn about it from their perspective, and we want to present our perspective. And then even if they use labels about us, we don't respond with labels. We ask them a question about it, so we understand more about where they're coming from. So another question might be, so how do we not use labels? So for example, if I do think another person's being unreasonable and I want to call them unreasonable, then a different way of saying that is, that idea doesn't work for me. So effectively I'm still catering for the same issue, that I don't their idea doesn't kind of work for me. I might think they're being unreasonable, but I can simply say that idea doesn't work for me. Then I'm not calling them a name. They're aware that it doesn't work for me. So it's then up to them whether they want to make a different decision or not. But I'm not getting involved in throwing spears at them. If I think they're being a bully, again, I can say, you know, that behavior or that way of communicating with me by calling me names or by standing behind me, you know, picking out all the things you think I'm doing wrong, that doesn't work for me. So, can we create a different way of doing things? Whereas if I just say you're being a bully, they're going to defend against it. So it's not going to help me to call them that name. So I hope one of the things that I want to get across is that we have the power, we have the personal power, we have the capacity to get something from any communication we have from people, even if we hate them, even if we despise them, even if we think that they're a bad person in some way, if we think that they're not doing their job properly, if they're a manager or a colleague, we might think all those personal things about them, but it doesn't help us to label them. But what we can do is we can present our point of view, we can say what we want, we can explore the labels they have about us as long as they're not overly abusive, and we can take control of what we get from a conversation. And so I would really ask you to consider, if you are going to have or have been having communication with people and it's not going well and it feels like it's going around in circles and you're getting worn out by it and you're feeling resentful and you're feeling really angry about the person and you think they should be different in one way or another, they shouldn't be like that if they're in that job role, they shouldn't be like that if they're my son or daughter, they shouldn't be like that if they're my parent, they shouldn't be like that if they're my neighbour, all of those things are going on. If you have any communication with that person, to think, what is it you want from the communication? What is it you want to be different? What is it you want to say? And how can you do it without any personal reference to the person? Not because you're being nice, not because you're giving in, but because it serves your purpose, because it's useful for you to do that. Yeah. If there's anything not clear about that, please put your questions and comments in the section below, because I'm happy to take that further and explore it further, because obviously there's always a lot more can be said about these things, but the basic point being to be aware of the labels we have for people, but not to use them in our communication, because it just distracts from moving forward. And then the final thing to say, which kind of can be considered kind of obvious in all conversations, but the most important thing is to listen to what that person says, because by listening you're not agreeing. And this is one of the difficulties a lot of people have with the idea of listening to someone. They think that by listening they're allowing in a view about them, that it allows it to be said, and so you've got to jump over it and kind of cut it off, because otherwise it feels like you're agreeing with them. Well, it doesn't mean you're agreeing with them. You're listening to them. You're giving them space to say their point of view. You're accepting that they have a point of view, even if it's a negative one about you. But it doesn't mean to say you're agreeing with it. So again, if it's not too strong a negative view, it's not an abusive term, you can ask them, so what leads you to say that about me? And you can always say afterwards, well, what you're saying there isn't how I see it. But you're not returning with your own personal label about the other person. But by giving space for them to say what they have to say, it definitely also means they're going to give you more space, because the less it feels like this spear throwing battle to be heard, and that space is given to be listened to, it means that in turn you are likely to be listened to more. But again, even if you don't feel you have been listened to, you're still learning continuously what's going on and why it's happened and what their point of view is, so that you learn more, instead of just simply getting involved in this kind of spear throwing exercise, which unproductive, pointless, useful, destructive communication, well, I wouldn't even call it communication actually, destructive interactions are kind of have as features that it's just name calling. It's just, you're unreasonable, you're a bully, you're stubborn, you're a lefty, you're a fascist right winger, you're a, whatever it is, whatever the label is. It's it means that the conversation is more about the labels we have for each other rather than about the issues that we feel are important and that are of relevance to us. So you're not taking your opportunity to make the most of that communication if you get involved in the personal comments that are made. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope that's been of interest. As always, please send me your comments either in the comment section below on YouTube or via the Chaos Podcast. Please give a rating on the Chaos Podcast. It's starting to get some nice ratings on there, so any more would be very much appreciated. If you like this video, please like it. Please share it with anybody you think might be interested or find it useful. Please subscribe and hit the bell if you'd like to be notified of future videos. I hope you found it useful as always. That's my wish, that it's supportive and helpful for you if you're experiencing some kind of difficulty in your communication or a conflict that's not presently resolved. Thanks very much for listening. Thanks very much for watching, and have a good day. Bye bye.